Today I'm going to make some Welsh cakes as it's St David's Day coming up. Usually they've got currants or some sort of dried fruit in them, but I'm going to use chocolate chips instead because I know a lot of people don't like currants. So I've got 50 grams of chocolate chips. I've got a half teaspoon of mixed spice. If you don't have that, you could use cinnamon or a bit of nutmeg. It's up to you. I've got a large egg. I've got 100 grams of sugar. I've used caster, but it doesn't really matter which. And I've got 200 grams self-raising flour and 100 grams of butter, or you could use a block margarine instead. So the first part of this recipe is to put the butter in with the flour. Dice it up as small as you can. And then we're going to do a rubbing in method, the same as if you were making pastry or a few other recipes, but we're aiming for a nice fine crumbly mixture. So if you cut them into nice small pieces to start with, you can rub them in quite quickly without melting the butter in your hands. So that'll probably take you about 5 minutes. So for the rubbing in, using your fingertips, squashing those lumps of margarine or butter until they go into the flour. The flour will then turn to a nice pale yellow colour. Keep mixing, getting right down to the bottom in case there's any flour that you haven't rubbed any fat into. Once you've done that, you just have a little check that there aren't any big lumps, and if there are, you just give them a little squash in, and that should do. And I'm going to tip in the sugar, chocolate chips, and the spice. And you can use a spoon, you can use a knife, you can use your hands just to combine those thoroughly. Now, if you prefer for the rubbing in, you could use a mixer or a food processor to do that for you. That would probably take you about 10 seconds compared with 5 minutes for doing it by hand. Obviously, if you haven't got one, it's quite easy to do. Just like that. For the next step, I'm going to crack the egg into a basin. Or it could be in a jug, a cup, doesn't really matter what. And I'm just going to give it a bit of a beat to the fork. This will just help it to mix in more easily. So I'm then going to use the same blunt knife that I cracked the egg with. Don't need anything special for this. I'm going to make a well in the centre. I might need a little bit of milk or water, so I'm just going to get some milk ready. If that egg isn't big enough, then I will need to add a little bit of extra liquid. We're aiming for it to be a similar consistency of dough to a pastry rather than a cake mix or a bread mix, which would be a lot softer. So you can then start mixing that in through the centre, and you really need to give it a thorough mix before you think about adding any extra liquid, because all of a sudden it will come together and it could be too wet. So the same as if you were making pastry, just be patient at this point. Have a good mix, try not to lose any. And if you do think you need any extra liquid, what I'm going to do is to mix a little bit of milk or water into the remains of the egg, and I'm going to drip it into the crumbly dry areas, and really that tiny sort of half a teaspoon at a time, really small amount. Go round the edge of the bowl, cut through, and go right to the bottom, cut through with your knife rather than just stirring. and you'll see if there are any dry areas. So literally a couple of drops on there. Don't go pouring anything in. And when you see it all looking quite clumpy, put back your hand onto it and it should feel damp all over. It shouldn't feel wet and sticky. If you have over watered it or over egged it at this point, you could sprinkle a little bit of flour in, but hopefully you won't need to be rescuing it. So once you think you've added enough, then you can get your hand in. I tend to just put one hand in the bowl and hold the bowl with the other hand. Just squeeze it together lightly. It should be a nice soft dough. No crumbly bits, no dry bits falling off. If you squeeze it, it should stay in a lump. You shouldn't have pieces falling off or dripping off. And just give a little squeeze to get rid of any cracks. You're not going to knead it as if it was a bread dough because that might toughen the mixture. If at this point you think your dough's a bit soft, you could wrap it in cling film and put it in the fridge to firm up for half an hour. If you're ready to go, dust your table with a little bit of flour. Dust your dough with a little bit of flour. I've got a tray, or you could use a plate ready, and I've lined it with some greaseproof paper. You could use cling film or foil just to stop it sticking to whatever surface you're putting it on. So I'm going to get all of the making and cutting out done before I worry about heating my pan. I'm going to clean down and then I'm going to start cooking them. At this point you could also cook some later so they could be fresh and hot when people are ready to eat them. So I'm going to roll them out. You want it about 1 centimetre thick, so probably about twice as thick or maybe a little bit more than that you would do pastry. Make sure you've got plenty of flour. Always dust it off if you put too much. It's a lot easier than having to loosen it off the table. So not too thin. Don't press too hard with your rolling pin. So that's come out as probably about 20 centimetres diameter, something like that. And you could lift it up and move it if you really needed to. So when you're ready to cut, it can be any shape, any size, totally up to you. This is a standard size cutter and it says 68 millimeters on the side. I've got another one that's 58, so that would be okay as well. If you've got heart shaped, that'd be quite nice. Dip them in a little flour and just press, give it a tiny little wiggle. Not too much because you will distort the shape, so they can come out like that. That's a frilly edged one. You can do them plain. Might cut through easier, especially if you've got something quite solid like chocolate chips. You might want to go a little bit smoother edged. So I'm going to do a mixture of sizes. But it's totally up to you. Once you've cut them all, you can gently squeeze what's left back and re-roll. So you should get quite a fair out of this amount of mixture. Even though it didn't look a lot in the bowl, it should make quite a few Welsh cakes. I'm up to 7 already. That's 8. Oops. 9. So it should easily get 10 to 12, obviously depending on the size. If they're bigger ones, I would say you're more likely to get about 8 to 10. And what's quite nice to do, if you've got a piece like that and you want to do a tester, you can test your pan. You could just cut it like that. It doesn't have to be any particular shape. So I've got my offcuts. I'm going to squeeze them together. It's a bit sticky now, so I'm going to just flour my hands, squeeze it together and and re-roll. I wouldn't do too many re-rolls. I usually do one best cut and one re-roll because it can start to get a little bit dry if you re-roll too many times. So that should do. If you've got chocolate chips, they will actually stop you rolling out too thin. You can feel them crunching under the rolling pin. So get them all on your tray ready. And like I said, I'm not going to re-roll these pieces, but I am going to cook them as they are. So you've got something to be testing rather than eating all your best ones. So I'm going to clean down now, and then I'm going to heat my pan. I'm actually going to use the pancake cooker that I used last week, but a frying pan or a bakestone is fine. When you're ready, you need to heat your pan or bakestone or pancake maker like I've got, and you could use lard, you could use a little brushing of oil. I'm going to use a bit of butter and just again like I do with pancakes, rub the packet over it. It needs to be on a sort of medium heat, and they're going to take about 3 minutes per side, but obviously if they feel squishy on the inside you need to give them a little bit longer. If you're using a frying pan, obviously you need a nice heavy frying pan, and you probably need to cook less at a time. So I'm going to squeeze quite a few onto here. If you've got a bakestone, you can put lots on. Just keep an eye on the timings. Turn them over with a spatula or a palette knife, whatever you want to, when you think they're ready. These have now had about 3.5 minutes, so I'm going to have a little look by just bending them up, just see the colour, and I'm going to try flipping the middle one, which was the first one that went down. They will be soft because obviously they're only cooked on one side. If you want to cook them for longer, you might need to just be regulating your heat up and down. And I'm now thinking I should have put less on here because it doesn't leave me a lot of room. So next time I would put less. When they're done, I'm going to put them onto a plate and sprinkle them with a little caster sugar. So once you flip them all over, I am actually using a timer on these because it's much easier than messing about and testing them all the time. Set them for 3 minutes, then I'm going to have a look. So be patient because the more you fiddle with them, the more likely they are to break. When they've had enough time, just to check they're done, press them lightly. They should be soft but not squishy. Obviously, like most cakes, as they cool down, they will firm up as the batter sets again. So you don't want them to be really crisp coming off. Oops, starting to overdo that. So you just lift them off. I'm going to put them onto you can put them on a cooling rack, onto a plate, it doesn't really matter. But I've lined the plate with kitchen roll just to absorb any steam that's coming off them. And what I'm then going to do is just to sprinkle them with a little caster sugar. And that's it.